other cause, myotonia congenita or neuromyotonia you should rule out. Then ptosis for facial dystonia, ptosis, tetanic spasm you should rule out. And myoclonus always you rule out tics, tremor, fasciculation, myokymia. So investigation you have to decide accordingly, routine, general, MRI, CT scan, you have to decide according to your patient. But don't forget to rule out Wilson's disease. That is a treatable condition in young movement disorders. Basal ganglia, T2 hyperintensity, always think of Wilson's disease. But there may be other conditions like hyperamonic state, acute hepatic encephalopathy, then some metabolic disorder, hypoxic ischemic, Wernicke encephalopathy, carbon monoxide poisoning, Japanese encephalitis. Then the new molecule is Botox. I think this discussion will go on. That is another very big topic. I am just touching. Blepharospasm, oromandibular dystonia, hemifacial spasm, cervical dystonia. These are the classical examples where Botox acts as miracle. Patient gets complete relief. The effect lasts for 3 to 4 months. You have to repeat, but in a lower dose. And after a couple of sessions, patients are doing very well. I have experience, having experience of more than 300 cases, and particularly in focal dystonia, they are doing very well. Hand dystonia, writer's cramp, response is not that good. Laryngeal dystonia, I don't have any experience. Spasticity, I am having experience of couple of cases. In children, they are doing well. Adult, not much, not very encouraging. Blepharospasm, cervical dystonia, oromandibular dystonia, dysphonia, and focal limb dystonia are the candidates who should get benefit of Botox, because other molecules, these muscle relaxant, these Rivocon, that tetravengine, those molecules of not of much help. Even the trihexyphenidyl, you have to give pretty large dose that will produce toxicity to the patients. They do not get much benefit with those. So always rule out the local cause of movement disorder. You have to differentiate it from seizure, number 2, and you have to localize where is the possible or most likely lesion for dystonia. For example, you have seen facial dyskinesia, that is not pure dystonia, but dyskinesia is due to abnormal regeneration of the 7th nerve. And similarly, any dystonia in younger age group, any focal movements in younger age group must rule out Wilson's disease, which is a treatable condition and easy to diagnose. Thank you very much for your kind information.
Thank you, Dr. It was a wonderful presentation and well illustrated by so many case studies. I am sure the delegates have enjoyed, and the presentation is open for discussion. If there are any questions, Dr. Sir would be very happy to answer. So please feel free.
Hello. So how you can differentiate there is a behavioral abnormal facial movements with this kind of the myoclonus or tics of the thing?
In myoclonus, yeah, if it is cortical myoclonus, you can get some behavioral abnormality. Of course, you can get behavioral abnormality. I didn't touch that part. Behavioral abnormality in the form of mannerism, in the form of emotional lability, that you can get in cortical myoclonus, in pseudovalvar palsy, in case of bihemispherical stroke, diffuse encephalopathy, where you can get behavioral abnormality, emotional lability, and movement disorder.
So some people have some behavioral abnormal facial movements, like the frontal muscles movement during the talking. They have some abnormal movements of like frontal muscles, sometimes eyes movements.
This comes under the heading of tics.
Yeah.
These are tics. These are not dystonia.
Yeah.
These are tics, short.
So this is some neurological problem or some behavioral problem?
Yeah, tics always, as I told, tics always comes under the heading of movement disorder. Yeah. DSM-4 has divided tics into 2 groups: pure motor tics, sensory motor tics, or focal with motor tics. There may be sound also with tics. And if tics are so severe, associated with behavioral abnormality, mannerism, attention deficit disorder, tics with attention deficit disorder, tics with depression, then it comes under the heading of Tourette. So that is the DSM-4 classification of tics.
What the treatment of this kind
Yeah, treatment is very interesting question. So what is the treatment? If it is simple motor tics, 1 or 2 in a day or so, just give explanation and give assurance, nothing. But if it is severe, then you have to choose an antipsychotics, starting from haloperidol, risperidone, along with this clonazepam. You have to give them, otherwise tics will not subside. And sometimes tics are so severe, for example tics, then the muscles are required to be paralyzed with Botox. These tics may be so severe. And sometimes focal tics may be so frequent and so embarrassing that you have to give them Botox. So tics may not be so simple.
Yeah, because the parents are so concerned because it creates some social phobia.
Yeah, exactly. There is a big classification given by DSM-4. Tics may require up to Botox therapy. Antipsychotics are having some limitation, having some side effects also. Clonidine also has been tried in tics, but I don't have experience. I give them antipsychotics and triaxiphenidine along with clonazepam.
So there is some role of the interruption. Suppose some kids are doing such activity. There is some role of the interruption by the parents to
Simple motor tics, yeah, you can instruct parents. जो बच्चे को टोक दो, बच्चे को थोड़ा assure करो, give them assurance. बच्चे की थोड़ा deviate और कोई play to deviate them, give them some play, give them some computer games and so on. इस तरह कोई. Otherwise, treatments may be toxic also, because most of the antipsychotics are having their own limitation and toxicity.
Sir, in case of rigidity, what we can do, sir?
Rigidity is a part of, as I told, part of movement disorder, hypokinetic movement disorder, akinetic rigid syndrome. 80% is Parkinsonism. You know the treatment of Parkinsonism. You have to give it this triaxiphenidine, levodopa group of drugs, depending on the situation, at what stage the disease is. Parkinson stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. Simple dopa agonist may be sufficient. For example, pramipexole, that may be sufficient in stage 1 or stage 2, early stage, along with this triaxiphenidine.
Suppose in the walking,
Yeah.
some person has the spasm in the calf muscles. So this is concerned some to neurological or this is some the accumulation of lactic acid in the muscles.
As I told, only neurological is restless leg syndrome, RLS. That is very, otherwise simple spasm may not be. Myalgia, but you have to rule out a rheumatoid factor, local cause, calcium deficiency. That is a very common problem. Or if there may be some entrapment of the nerve at knee joint level, you can go for an EMG NCB study, get a calcium level, RA factor. Hello, sir.
Hello. Sir,
Yeah.
quite a large number of people I have observed, from students to clerical staff to even professors.
Yeah.
They lift their leg on the toe and just continuous movement, uncontrollable.
It's continuous. Yeah. I think you have to rule out whether it is clonus or not.
Vibrating the leg.
Yeah.
Involuntary.
Involuntary continuous movement, there are two possibilities. It may be clonus. It may be clonus, number one, due to spasticity. If there is extreme spasticity, there will be clonus, spontaneous movement in the legs or in the upper limb, which is called clonus. Or you have to decide whether it is tremor or not, coarse tremor. Two possibilities. One is coarse tremor. For example, Parkinsonian tremor, this peel rolling movement, continuous peel rolling movement, maybe in hand, maybe in leg. No, not it, it may be unilateral. It may be unilateral, it may be in hand. I have seen in starting with leg, hemi-Parkinsonism, mono Parkinsonism, starting only in leg. starting only in hand. So you have to see detailed neurological examination is required. I am not telling this is Parkinson. I am not committing anything. I am telling these are the possibilities. Whenever there is a coarse movement involving one limb or one side of the body, you have to think of these are the possibility. Possibility number one, hemiparkinsonism. It may be clonus, it may be myoclonus, or it may be simple tics, habit spasm. He is habitual of doing that. You have to see. That's why the neurologists are here. Neurological examination. You have to take a history, you have to do a neurological examination. Neurological examination is a big thing. It's not a simple just putting hammer is nothing. Neurological examination, you have to see inspection, motor examination, sensory examination, to look for cerebellar sign, reflexes, then plantar sign. You have to go through the protocol. Until unless I follow the protocol, I cannot reach into a conclusion. Just inspection doesn't mean anything. You have to follow the protocol. That protocol is given in, Dr. Khanna will agree, that protocol is given in any textbook. You have to follow the protocol. That's why that's the clinical medicine. That is the essence of clinical medicine. Otherwise, the technologist or even radiologist can make the diagnosis, but they don't know where to do CT scan, when to do CT scan, where to do MRI, when to do MRI. So this is the difference between radiologist and clinician.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir,
Yeah.
I am from research scholar, sir. My topic is on tardive dyskinesia.
Sir, he's there.
Sir,
Achha.
what is the difference between facial dyskinesia and tardive dyskinesia?
Facial dyskinesia, you have seen the lady
Yes, sir.
is focal of this facial nerve origin, and tardive dyskinesia is generalized. Whole body is involved. Patient is on antipsychotics, long-standing antipsychotic. That is it entirely different. That is a more psychosomatic problem. They can have a neurological problem. They can have a psychotic problem. That may be drug-induced also. Tardive.
Then,
That
sir,
is
what is,
generalized.
sir, what is the difference between Parkinson and tardive dyskinesia?
Parkinsonism, I told, this is a hypokinetic movement disorder. There's two headings: hypokinetic, hyperkinetic. दो पढ़े. Hypokinetic, Parkinsonism; hyperkinetic, dyskinesia, dystonia, tremor, chorea, athetosis, all.
Sir,
So dyskinesia, as you told, dyskinesia, it is hyperkinetic.
sir, what is the role of dopamine in Parkinson and tardive dyskinesia?
So dopamine you have to give. You have to give in Parkinson because it is dopamine deficiency. You have to give dopamine or dopamine agonist. So that is the basic. Otherwise, Parkinson's patients will not get up from bed. Okay? But tardive dyskinesia, you see, why their dyskinesia is. This may be due to some neuroleptic drug, or this may be drug induced. So first withdraw the drug. So if there is a significant depletion of dopamine, then you can give little bit supplementation, but don't give much. Then again that will produce some kind of dyskinesia. So you have to be very careful while prescribing dopamine in tardive dyskinesia.
Good afternoon, sir. So
Yeah.
then, what is the normal level of dopamine in a healthy body?
Normal?
Normal level of dopamine, sir.
Normal level, you tell me. Normal level of dopamine. Dopamine at where? At basal ganglia, at blood, where? You tell us. What is the normal level? In basal ganglia, level is different. In the subthalamic nucleus, level is different. Substantia nigra, level is different. You tell us. This is your subject. You have to tell us. You're a pharmacologist. You have to tell us.
Sir, Parkinson disease or tardive dyskinesia is a side effect of antipsychotic therapy on acute therapy and chronic therapy. If we draw the therapy of psychosis, neuroleptic को withdraw कर देते हैं सर, तो how we treat the psychosis? क्योंकि वो तो Parkinson और tardive cause कर रहे हैं.
For a short period, if you withdraw psychosis, antipsychotic, so that will not cause any harm. For a short period, withdrawal of antipsychotic will not cause any harm because it's a chronic disease, it's a long-standing disease. So withdrawal for couple of days or couple of weeks will not make any difference.
Chronic therapy का tardive dyskinesia हो रहा है side effect.
हाँ जी, तो अब you have to withdraw it. So even if you withdraw it, this dystonia will not come back to normalcy immediately. This will take some time to become to normal.
बट सर टार्डिव डिस्किनेसिया विड्रॉ करने पे ठीक नहीं होता है सर, ट्रीटमेंट देना पड़ता
नहीं,
है।
ट्रीटमेंट देना तो पड़ेगा, बट व्हाट ट्रीटमेंट यू विल गिव, वेदर यू विल गिव डोपामिन और सम काइंड ऑफ दिस मसल रिलैक्सेंट, that you have to decide. You can give triaxiphenidil also, that may be sufficient. Straight away going for dopamine, you can give just simple triaxiphenidil along with physiotherapy, muscle relaxant you may give.
एक्यूट थेरेपी पे भी सर टार्डिव को पार्किंसन हो जाता है सर।
Acute therapy, they don't develop Parkinsonism as such. They get some rigidity,
यस सर।
they get some movement disorder. It's a complex rigidity as well as movement disorder. So you have to choose. You may give dopamine agonist to start with. Don't go to straightaway dopamine agonist.
Sir, and levodopa is also caused by
Levodopa is dopamine,
dyskinesia.
levodopa is straightaway dopamine.
And dopa induced dyskinesia होता है सर।
Syndopa is a little modified form of dopamine. Entacapone plus 50 mg, 100 mg are available in market. Yeah. Into dopa. So this half-life will increase little. Because dopamine sometimes we have to give 5 times in a day, 6 times in a day. This pure dopa. But these drugs, the syndopa or not syndopa, this entacapone, this we can give 2 times or 3 times in a day. And SR preparations are nowadays available, sustained release. We can give 2 to 3 times in a day. So that there will be no diurnal variation, no bradykinesia in between, no fluctuation in between. So that is our aim, so that patient can have a smooth movement throughout the day.
एक्सक्यूज मी सर, सर अभी आदिश ने पूछा कि एल डोपा से भी टार्डिव डिस्काइनेशिया हो रहा है और हमने पढ़ा है कि सर हेलोपेरिडोल से भी टार्डिव डिस्काइनेशिया हो रहा है। तो सर ये तो कंट्रोवर्सी हो गई, एल डोपा से भी टार्डिव डिस्काइनेशिया हो रहा है और हेलोपेरिडोल से भी।
So that's what I'm telling now. It's a tardive dyskinesia is a complex mechanism. You can get a Parkinsonian picture as well as psychotic picture.
यस सर।
ठीक है? So Parkinsonian with psychotic pictures. So you have to compromise what is the prominent one. If the Parkinsonian picture is more, if there is more rigidity, bending, patient cannot even get up from squatting posture, stiff, then you have to give low dose dopamine agonist or L-dopa. But if patient is violent, having psychotic behavior, then you can give low dose sedative or haloperidol in very low dose, or risperidone you can add in low dose. What is the mechanism of risperidone? It's different from haloperidol, you know.
Yes, sir.
At what level risperidone acts?
सर डोपामिन एंटागोनिस्ट और 5-HT एंटागोनिस्ट।
It's not pure dopamine antagonist.
Yes, sir.
Risperidone is not pure dopamine antagonist. It is having other mechanism also. So a risperidone low dose is better option rather than haloperidol. So you are having any experience treating tardive dyskinesia? You have seen any case of tardive dyskinesia, or it's just theoretical discussion? Theoretical discussion. Okay. Any other question?
सर बोटॉक्स थेरेपी मतलब कैसे
या।
कितनी कॉस्ट पड़ती है, कैसे करते, कितना ट्रीटमेंट है सर इसका?
बोटॉक्स थेरापी के कॉस्ट कितना है?
ट्रीटमेंट
तो
कैसे?
या बोटॉक्स की जो है इट्स ए डोज डिपेंडेंट. You see, it's you have seen, I have shown the last slide. This for blepharospasm we are using between 25 units to 35 units, or you can go even in the early stage, we can give even low dose 20 units. So 250 rupees approximately, 250 to 300 rupees per unit. So approximate for blepharospasm the cost will be between 65 to 7,000. For the hemifacial spasm, facial dystonia, we have to give around 30 units. So cost will be between 85 to 9,000. For cervical dystonia, yeah, cost will be higher because we have to give minimum 100 units, 100 units to 200 units, up to 200 units, depending on the severity of dystonia. So 100 units will be costing with all therapy, etc. So it will be around 25,000. In cervical dystonia, that is the severe form of cervical dystonia. You have seen that फर्स्ट लाइट।
ये स्किन स्पेशलिस्ट यूज करते हैं रिंकल्स वगैरह में?
क्या?
ये बोटॉक्स थेरेपी जो है,
हाँ,
स्किन स्पेशलिस्ट यूज करते हैं ना, रिंकल्स वगैरह में यूज करते हैं?
बोटॉक्स थेरेपी स्किन स्पेशलिस्ट यूज करते हैं।
रिंकल्स वगैरह में जो,
हाँ जी, हाँ जी, हाँ जी, हाँ जी, बट इन लो डोज। I have seen in Delhi, Green Park, there are lots of these aesthetic clinics, Kaya Clinic and so on. So they use a huge amount of Botox, but in low dose. These ladies are using, they are non-doctors, but they are using Botox, but in very low dose. They don't know the mechanism, but for skin wrinkles and for the facial, some abnormality, deviation, they are using Botox.
it is quite safe, sir.
Huh? I don't know. I don't have any experience of aesthetic use of Botox. It's a big topic. Skin specialist, if any skin specialist is here, he can answer you.
In your practice, it is quite
No,
safe.
I've never used. I use only for movement disorder.
It is quite safe there.
Yeah.
In movement disorder.
Movement disorder, it is treatment of choice for blepharospasm, for hemifacial spasm, and for cervical dystonia. The American FDA has recommended for these three conditions. It is treatment of choice. These three conditions, there are no other option. Writer's cramp, yeah, Botox in higher dose is very effective, but lower dose is perhaps is not that effective. You have to give in higher dose. There will be some muscle weakness in higher dose, but it is treatment of choice. No other option. You don't have anything.
हिंदुस्तान में कब से यूज हो रही है सर ये बोटॉक्स?
हाँ जी,
कितने साल से यूज कर रहे हो सर ये बोटॉक्स थेरेपी हिंदुस्तान में?
5 years. I am using more than 5 years.
हिंदुस्तान में 5 years से यूज हो रही है, पहले से यूज हो रही है।
हिंदुस्तान में तो 10 years से यूज हो रहे हैं. एम्स पीपल, डॉक्टर गोयल, he is using for 10 years. I am using for last 5 years.
सर बॉटॉक्स जैसे मूवमेंट डिसऑर्डर में दिया, कितने सेशंस पेशेंट को लेने पड़ते हैं? एक बॉटॉक्स इंजेक्शन से कितनी रिकवरी, मतलब प्रोग्नोसिस?
एक इंजेक्शन में नहीं होता है.
कितने?
You have to give at least 3-4 sittings.
3-4 सिटिंग?
हाँ जी, depending on the severity of the spasm. Hemifacial spasm, grade 1, grade 2.
हाँ जी सर.
It all depends on the severity.
सर ये कम्प्लीटली रिकवरी मतलब बॉटॉक्स की है कि पेशेंट को ये रिवर्स नहीं होगी कंडीशन मूवमेंट डिसऑर्डर में?
After third dose, many patients didn't come back. That means probably they don't have relapse. ठीक है, I don't have follow up for more than 3 years. In 3 years, 50% patients have come back with the symptoms. 50% patients didn't come back. Perhaps 50% of them have cured.
एंड सर ड्यूरेशन मतलब फर्स्ट
3
बॉटॉक्स
to 4 months, I told 3 to 4 months.
एवरी मंथ?
Every month you have to follow up, but activity and the effect persist for 3 to 4 months.
ओके.
3 to 4 months, 4 months, after 4 months, this will subside almost. Up to 5-6 months, we have seen some amount of effect remains persistent.
There can be one more reason that after 3 or 4 treatments, his pocket is exhausted.
नहीं, the many persons are having health card in their pocket also. So it is now reimbursable. Now every treatment in Hindustan is reimbursable. I don't know why people are not getting health card. Health card, if we are getting insurance of our vehicle, otherwise police will catch us. But why we are roaming in the road, on the road without a health card? If we got met with an accident, then who will pay? We should have a health card in my pocket. Health card up to the range of 5 lakhs. I think that should be, every person should have a health card. Tata AIG, Birla, I think ICICI Lombard, and some governments, GIC, all are giving health cards. People should have, government is giving health card to the poor, 30,000 health card. So why not we?
True, it's there in US, maybe in few years in
Yeah.
India too, we have
Yeah,
practice.
this requires awareness or some government policy.
Right.
Because in vehicle it's mandatory. You can't go without a valid insurance
license.
on road. But why we?
Right. So thank you Dr. Burman.
Excuse me, sir.
See, a lot of discussion would come, I know. Dr. Burman is an
That
expert
we'll do in tea time.
administering Botox. I have seen him administering. A lot of skill is required. It's dose dependent, patient tailored, and it is an imported, it's not manufactured in India. And in whole of North India, at least I know one urologist who is administering. There is no one. It's not easy. No doctor is doing it. So Dr. Saab can speak for days on this.
These are the new molecules which are being imported. Just for example, that TPA, hard TPA in the morning session.
Right.
This is also not manufactured in India. These German remedies, now name is Bollinger. This Bollinger is importing this TPA
From Germany. Right.
Hanji, and this Botox is being imported by Allenger.
Right. So this is his expertise. So we have had full session on Botox. So
In another day, in another occasion.
We can continue our discussion during tea time. Let us not take the time of next speaker. Next speaker has already arrived, and Dr. Naveen Malhotra.
Yeah, this will be another very interesting session.
Yeah.
Neuralgia.
Neuralgia. So we'll have the pleasant ceremony of mementos after the next session. So we'll begin with the next speaker first.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your valuable experience. We will honor Dr. J.P. Burman with token of remembrance after next talk. Now, may I request to Dr. Naveen Malhotra, MD, DNBE, FIPM, FICA, Professor Department of Anesthesiology, in charge in Pain Management Center, Postgraduate Institute of Medical Sciences, Rohtak. Dr. Naveen Malhotra has to his credit 126 international and national publications. He has 229 guest lectures and free papers, presentations. Awards are ISA Bhopal Award for Academic Excellence 2015, KPR Young Anesthesiologist Award 2009, COPS Award 2001. Area of interest in chronic pain management. Important positions held: Governing Counseling Member, Indian Society of Anesthesiology, National Secretary, Research Society of Anesthesiology. I kindly request you, sir, to please come on the dais for talk on the topic management of hemicranial pain.
I thank Dr. Burman for inviting me here and to speak on a topic related to chronic pain, which is my area of interest. And I know it's Sunday afternoon, post-lunch session, and I'll ensure that I don't allow you to sleep or be sedated, and I'll keep it more clinical and more practical. So I bring with my greetings from Pain Management Center, the Dard Nivaran Kendra has been named, which is situated in the new OPD from rooms 52 to 55, of where I am working and of which I am in charge. So it's a routine view of any OPD in the medical college. Pain Management Center was started by me in 2007, and we have got a good OPD, pain OT in the OPD itself, pain recovery room, counseling room, a reception, waiting hall and nursing station. Before that we do had a pain clinic, and in 2007 we upgraded it to Pain Management Center. And I just checked the record, and before 2006, 96 patients were examined so far, and majority of them were trigeminal neuralgia and post-herpetic neuralgia. Now, I'm happy to say that average number of patients per pain OPD I do on Tuesdays and Saturdays is around 200, and number of patients in 2015 were around 12,000. And number of interventions of pain blocks done per pain OT is 30 to 45 per OPD day. And we do have a fluoroscope guided pain OT, which is in the super specialty block, and on average 15 cases per OT list is done, and rest 2 days I do ultrasound guided procedures. That was about the Pain Management Center. Coming to the hemicranial neuralgia, the learning objectives given by Dr. Burman to me that I have to speak on: trigeminal neuralgia, glossopharyngeal neuralgia, occipital neuralgia, atypical facial pain as it was called earlier, now it is known as persistent idiopathic facial pain, and TM joint disorders. I'll briefly touch on all these topics and how they present, how do we do the medical management, how do we do the interventional pain management. Trigeminal neuralgia, tic dolorex is just like, for the benefit of the students, आसमान से बिजली चमकना। पेशेंट एकदम से कहता है जी मेरे चेहरे के ऊपर बिजली चमकी, मेरी जान निकल गई, ना मैं खा पाया, ना मैं बोल पाया, ना मैं सुन पाया, ना मैं पानी पी पाया, और एकदम से मैं ठीक भी हो गया। जैसे लाइटनिंग होती है ना ड्यूरिंग रेनी सीजन, yesterday also it was bit thunderstorm was there, so just like this lightning occurs and patient has severe pain. So it's usually the unilateral painful disorder, brief electric shock like pains, very abrupt in onset and even abrupt in termination also, and is more than 90% limited to one or more divisions of TGN, trigeminal nerve. And as per the classification of headache disorders, three typical types of trigeminal neuralgia are there. Classical trigeminal neuralgia, which is caused by compression of the trigeminal root in the brain, trigeminal neuralgia with concomitant persistent facial pain, and symptomatic trigeminal neuralgia caused by causes other than vascular compression, like some tumor, some cyst. It is a rare disease, but prevalence can be as high as 12% per 1 lakh patients. So population. Since 2006 onwards, I am maintaining a registry of these patients with trigeminal neuralgia, and we have around 2400 patients on the follow-up who come every 6 monthly or 3 monthly or 1 yearly, depending upon their symptoms, take the medications or get the blocks done. Male-female ratio is it's more common in females. Peak age of onset is around 50 to 60 years, and only one disease has been associated with it very commonly, that is multiple sclerosis. So we should always get an MRI done in such patients to rule out multiple sclerosis. There is a blood vessel in the brain which compresses the trigeminal nerve root, and this compression leads on to twisting of the nerve fibers, and it lowers the excitability threshold of those nerves, and there occurs high frequency discharges. So as the electric current is flowing, in these wires, and if there is too much of current, there will be short circuit, there will be sparking. Similarly, madam, when these patients have high discharges, they will have electrical like symptoms, and this can result from tumors, multiple sclerosis and AV malformations. The pain is unilateral, only 3% is bilateral, and that is why and they are restricted to the divisions V1, V2 and V3, and the most common divisions which are involved are second and third. So as I have told you earlier, it is electrical shock like, shooting, stabbing or sharp in quality, and the severity is moderate to severe, but it can be milder at times. The attack of pain lasts for a few seconds to 2 minutes, and there are around 10 to 70 attacks can occur in a day. Imagine a patient who is having 70 attacks in a day. He will not be able to wash his face, he will not be able to brush his teeth, he will not be able to shave his face, he will not be able to bath, he will not be able to drink, he will not be able to speak. So what is the quality of life? It is bloody hell. And fortunately there is some refractory period between the attacks, and where we have to come into play and ensure that patient is pain-free either by medications or by some blocks. So even a light innocuous touch can lead on to severe pain, and there can be, because of this so much of pain, there can be depression, anxiety. Anxiety, if I do anything, pain will reoccur. Depression, what is my life? So overall quality of life is too much less. Imaging, MRI has to be done, and the primary aim is to confirm or rule out whether there is any vascular malformation which is compressing the nerve root, to rule out multiple sclerosis, and to rule out any intracranial tumor or cyst. The first line of treatment is definitely a medical line, and carbamazepine and oxcarbamazepine, they are the drug of choice. So you can go from as high as 200 to 1200 milligrams per day. You can start 100 TDS, go on to 200 TDS, and then 200, 200 and 400. And oxcarbamazepine is also a good substitute, 600 to 1800 milligrams per day. Then we usually combine it with other anti-epileptic drugs like pregabalin or gabapentin, and with tricyclic antidepressants like amitriptyline. There are lamotrigine 400 milligrams up to 400 milligrams per day, and baclofen up to 40 to 80 milligrams per day. They are also used at times. And in an emergency, you may have to go for some local blocks with local anesthetics or IV infusion of phenytoin. But if medical treatment is not successful, then we will have to go for either go for the selective nerve root block or the V1, V2, maxillary mandibular or supraorbital, supratrochlear, or even the gastric ganglion, and if there is a MRI proven vascular loop, microvascular decompression of the nerve by the vessel contact. No doubt, those patients who undergo surgery successfully, there is a sustained pain relief, with 90% of the patients reporting initial pain relief for more than for 1 year. But it is a major surgical procedure, and we have to do a craniotomy to reach trigeminal ganglion, and average mortality is around 0.2 to 0.5%, and 4% of the patients suffer from CSF leak, infarct, hematoma, and aseptic meningitis, and long-term complications are sensory loss and hearing loss. So it's not a safe, absolutely safe procedure. Then there are more regarding gastric ganglion. You can do a radiofrequency thrombocoagulation, balloon decompression, or percutaneous neurolysis with glycerol. Earlier we used to do with alcohol. And the most common side effects are sensory loss, anesthesia dolorosa, corneal numbness. Gamma knife surgery is also option. It's effective up to 70%, but the major disadvantage is it's a very costly procedure. So what to do if patient is not willing for surgery, cannot afford gamma knife, or is not willing for surgery? You have to offer something, and is not responding to the medical management. So you have to combine medical management with the nerve blocks, and the most commonly one are used through the coronoid approach, and you go for selective block of the maxillary division or the mandibular division, especially in patients who have got trigeminal neuralgia, facial trauma, cancer pain, post-herpetic neuralgia. These patients really do well with these nerve blocks. So this is the classical picture we always remember, that this is the distribution of the V1, that means the first division of the mandibular nerve, the fifth nerve, trigeminal nerve, this is the maxillary division, and this is the mandibular division. So these areas, if pain is in this part, go for the mandibular nerve block. If pain is in this part, go for the maxillary nerve block, and in this part, go for the supraorbital, supratrochlear nerve block. And it can be, you just go through the coronary approach and hit the lateral pterygoid plate and put on the drug. The choice of drug depends upon the clinicians to clinicians. Some put local anesthetic and deposteroids, some go for the glycerol, some go for the phenol. So this is the mandibular division. The only thing we have to remember is that the maxillary division is pure sensory, but mandibular has got some motor component also. So always ensure and tell the patient that some amount of motor deficit can occur. So these are the pictures which show that how to do a mandibular nerve block, and it is easy, outpatient procedure. Patient walks in, gets it done, and only thing you have to remember is that you are around 1.5 to 2 inches in plane perpendicular to the skull, and you hit the lateral pterygoid plate, and you are just parallel to this zygomatic arch. And you can either do both combined maxillary and mandibular nerve block, or you can do selective maxillary or selective mandibular. These are the pictures. They typically present like this, that pain is there. These are the pictures showing paroxysms of the spasm of the patients, so much severe pain, and then you do it. These are all OPD pictures after doing local infiltration and doing under aseptic precautions. You can use a spinal needle or a finer spinal needle also, and hit the lateral pterygoid plate and give. I commonly use 6% phenol, 3 to 4 ml for each nerve. And these are all pictures of maxillary and mandibular nerve blocks, different patients. Nowadays we have started doing, since last 3 years, radiofrequency lesioning of maxillary and mandibular nerve also. And the advantage is that you avoid the chemical neurolysis which is done with phenol or alcohol, and with the heat you just block the sensory fibers, selectively block the sensory fibers of the maxillary and mandibular division by the radiofrequency generator. This is the lead, this is the needle, and through it we put a electrode. And this is the machine which comes, and you can set the temperature. For the smaller nerves we put around 40 degrees, 42 degrees, and for larger nerve, maxillary and mandibular, go for more than around 70 degrees and give a lesion for around 90 seconds or so. So I personally do it under floor slope guidance. It makes you more sure, and you're more confident that you're at the particular site. You elicit the paresthesia also, you confirm do the sensory stimulation also, and then you put the lesioning. So pulsed RF is done, 2 lesions are made, and patients do well for around 6 months or so without any sensory or motor deficit. So these are the pictures of the Siam lesioning of the maxillary and mandibular nerve. No doubt, if you do some procedures, there are some side effects also. So most common are the facial hematoma and post-procedure dysesthesias. And if you do a chemical neurolysis, this thing known as anesthesia dolorosa can occur, in which is characterized by mild pulling or burning sensations in the post-procedure period, and these are due to the incomplete destruction of the neuronal structures. And you may have got some abnormal motor function also if motor fibers are blocked, and weakness of the muscles of mastication can also occur. So you have to be very cautious, and once you acquire the skills, you know that you are only going to block the sensory fibers. Coming on to the from maxillary and mandibular, patients may have only selective supraorbital neuralgia, and either it is trigeminal neuralgia or herpetic neuralgia, and patient can have, this is the typical sensory nerve root involving the supraorbital nerve, and whenever we do a supraorbital nerve block, we always combine it with the supratrochlear nerve also. So this is the supraorbital notch, and a very fine needle is inserted medially around 15 at an angle of 15 degree. And the only thing when you are blocking these small nerves, the supraorbital, supratrochlear, infraorbital and mental, that please do not enter the foramen. If you enter the foramen, you will damage the nerve. And once you damage the nerve, then post-procedure issues will be more. So always ensure that you are above the foramen. And this is for the supratrochlear. And whenever we do supraorbital, as I told you, we just go slightly medial also and block supraorbital and supratrochlear combined. So just see this picture. This patient is on the OT table, and he is not allowing me to even clean. He is just jumping off. He is around 1.5 to 2 feet high. So such severe pain that he is not allowing me to even clean touch his skin. And once you do this block, and patient has got immediate relief. So these are the pictures of the supraorbital and supratrochlear nerve blocks, and this is a patient for the benefits. This is in which Kraft or herpes, as we call it, post-herpetic neuralgia, severe pain in this distribution. You do it both combined, supraorbital and supratrochlear nerve block. This, at least this area is pain-free. Again, post-block ecchymosis and hematoma formation can occur. This area is supplied with the infraorbital nerve. So this is a small face. You can just see supraorbital nerve, supratrochlear nerve, infraorbital nerve, mental nerve, mandibular nerve, maxillary nerve. So you have to be very sure. Ask the history where the pain is coming from. Then only if you block that particular nerve, pain will be relieved. Again, this is the infraorbital nerve, and it is just palpated below the inferior orbital ridge. It is palpated, and a small needle is inserted at a medially, direction is medially. For this also direction is medially, and these are the different pictures of infraorbital nerve block. Though not commonly done, but RF lesioning of infraorbital nerve is also done. The only reason why it is not done is we require very finer needles. Very finer needles are required for this infraorbital lesioning, and I do it under, as I told you, for the maxillary mandibular. These are also done under fluoroscopy, and this is the infraorbital foramen. Needle is nicely placed into the infraorbital foramen, and these smaller nerve roots, the temperature generated is around 60 degrees or so. So as I have told you, avoid inserting needle into the infraorbital foramen because nerve can get damaged and it can result into a compression neuropathy. There is an intraoral approach also for infraorbital nerve block, which is used in pediatric population. You just protract the lip and again feel for this notch and put the needle here. Especially in patients with cleft palate and cleft lip surgery, this is commonly done as for postoperative analgesia also. Coming into the mental nerve block, it has also got extraoral and intraoral approach for mental neuralgia, facial trauma, and pain secondary to herpes zoster. This area is, if pain is there in this area, this is supplied by the mental nerve. And again, a small amount of, it's at times difficult to feel in patients who are very chubby, but lean and thin patients, you can easily feel the mental nerve. And in the mental notch, put the needle, ensure that you are away from the foramen, just above the foramen, and put a solution. Local anesthetic, but corticosteroids initially for diagnostic procedures, and for therapeutic, you can go for 6% phenol or absolute alcohol. These are the pictures of the mental nerve, and this is a classical picture we always show to all the students, that supraorbital foramen, pupil, infraorbital foramen, and mental foramen, they all lie in one line. This is a common visual anatomy. And for the intraoral, you retract the lower lip and then put this needle into the mental notch. So always some clinical pulse are there with mental nerve block. Always examine the patient before performing the nerve block to rule out pre-existing neural compromise, because mental nerve is susceptible to blunt trauma and it can lead on to some amount of motor blockade. So because of facial trauma or because of neuralgia itself, some deficit may be present pre-op or pre-procedure. So ensure that there is no deficit pre-op or pre-procedure, so that, or if it is there, document it, so that nothing is attributed to your block. Inferiorly, coming on to the another subset of neuralgia on the face is inferior alveolar neuralgia. It is a painful condition in areas supplied by the inferior alveolar nerve, and it includes post-traumatic neuralgias and intraoral malignancies. It is a branch of mandibular nerve, and it provides innervation to canines and incision. And this is a block which is done with mouth open, and the anterior margin of mandible just above the last molar is identified by palpation, and the needle is advanced submucosally along the inner surface of the mandible. So inner surface of the mandible is the landmark, you just go there, but always before injecting, aspirate and then inject, aspirate and inject, because this is a very vascular area. All of the local anesthetic which you are putting, or all of the drug which you are putting, may go into the systemic circulation. And if you are using local anesthetic and everything goes into systemic circulation, there can be catastrophic issues. So these are the pictures. You are feel for the space behind the last molar, and on the inner aspect of the mandible, you put the drug. So always calculate the total milligram of local anesthetic, and ecchymosis and hematoma formation can occur. Moving from trigeminal neuralgia, so far I have covered trigeminal neuralgia, the mandibular division, maxillary division, infraorbital, supraorbital, mental, inferior alveolar. Moving on to another subject of condition, that is glossopharyngeal neuralgia. Glossopharyngeal neuralgia is also a unilateral painful disorder. Patients typically have pain in this region, and this goes up into the ear, down into the throat. So, and the most common worry is kind of cancer to nahi. All the patients who have got this pain are worried whether they have suffered, pain is there, so they are suffering from some oral tumor or oral cancer. So the characteristics are same. The pain is typically aggravated by talking too loudly. It is more commonly seen in teachers because they keep on, I am also a teacher at times, so keep quiet or sit down. So loud speaking, chewing and swallowing. So these are the three aggravating factors that patient will have pain. And the only thing which we ask them to do is, जैसे बोलते हैं ना, चुप बैठो, आप ऐसे बोलिए चुप बैठो. Don't be too loud. And secondly, don't take too cold solutions, whether it's a cold drink or even too hot solutions like a boiling hot milk. Or don't take things which are very bitter in taste like chutney. And please stop smoking, because smoking, but patients are very smart. So what they will say is, sir, हमने छोड़ दी. तो कहते क्या छोड़ दी? कि आपने कहा स्मोकिंग छोड़ दी, हमने हुक्का छोड़ दी, बीड़ी शुरू कर दी. तो बीड़ी छुड़वाओगे कहेंगे हमने सिगरेट शुरू कर दी. तो उन्हें बोलना पड़ता है जी हुक्का, बीड़ी, सिगरेट तीनों चीजें छोड़नी है, जो पी रहा हो उससे भी दूर रहना है. So you always have to rule out that there is nothing in the intracranial region, and can I have water please? and always rule out that there is no elongated styloid process, because if styloid process is enlarged, it will also compress the glossopharyngeal nerve. So carbamazepine and oxcarbamazepine are the drug of choice, and this is the landmark. You feel for the styloid process and just walk down posteriorly and block the glossopharyngeal nerve. And you draw a line from mastoid to the mandibular, and in between that is the styloid process, and you hit it and slightly walk down posteriorly. But always ensure, because important structures like carotid artery, IJV, facial nerve, accessory nerve, they're all lying there, so do not block them. So these are the pictures of the glossopharyngeal nerve block extraoral approach, very commonly done in patients with head and neck cancers, and always ensure that you are away from the artery and the vein. Intraoral approach is there, but usually in patients with tumors it is not possible because patient is having CA tonsil or CA pharynx, mouth opening is not there. So what we have done is, this is our own, I can say, innovation. We have developed this and we have reported this also, extramandibular approach of glossopharyngeal nerve block. So suppose here we are worried about injecting into the carotid artery or the vein, and here mouth opening is not possible, so we are injecting in between. So some drug will spread here and some drug will spread inside, so extramandibular approach of glossopharyngeal nerve block. Coming on to the greater and lesser occipital nerve block, it is commonly done in patients with occipital neuralgia, and this is the typical superior nuchal ridge. You just ensure that you are medial to the occipital artery while blocking the greater occipital nerve, and lateral to the artery while blocking the lesser occipital nerve. And patient is usually in position with the cervical spine flexed, and you palpate by the occipital artery. Medially you block the greater occipital nerve, and lateral you block the lesser occipital nerve. And always ensure why you are giving occipital nerve block. This is important. The most common reason that greater and occipital nerve block fails to relieve headache pain is that the headache syndrome is being treated because it is misdiagnosed as occipital neuralgia. Patient may be having tension type headache, cluster headache, migraine, and you are giving her occipital nerve block. So occipital neuralgia rarely occurs in the absence of trauma to the greater or lesser occipital nerves, and tension type headaches do not respond to occipital nerve blocks. This is very, very important. So any patient who has got headache should always have an MRI done to rule out unsuspected intracranial pathology, as well as cervical spine X-rays to rule out some abnormalities in the vertebral column or intercongenital abnormalities like Orner-Cherry syndromes. Next subset is, these are the common neuralgias. Persistent idiopathic facial pain. It is a facial pain that does not have characteristics of cranial neuralgias and cannot be attributed to a definitive disorder or nerve. And it is around 0.03%, incidence is unknown, and the main reason is abnormal sensitization of trigeminal nervous system, which play a very, very important role in this idiopathic facial pain. It is limited to one of the particular areas of the face. It is nagging, aching, dull, and it varies throughout the day, and it can be continuous or intermittent. It is provocated by stress, fatigue, and is almost always associated with irritable bowel syndrome, headache, and anxiety and depression are very commonly associated with it. Do CT and MRI to rule out any abnormality of the face and jaws and in the head. And tricyclic antidepressants along with carbamazepine, oxcarbamazepine, they are the drug of choice. And at times you may have to combine with selective certain reuptake inhibitors like duloxetine and venlafaxine and mirtazapine. Auriculotemporal neuralgia, for that patient may have post-traumatic auriculotemporal neuralgia, atypical pain following TM joint, acute herpes zoster, and pain secondary to malignancy. And this is the classical distribution of the auriculotemporal nerve, and these are the branches, and you just insert near this artery and ensure that you inject something here and something here in patients, but always rule out that his vision, his blood pressure is normal. So these are the pictures of the auriculotemporal nerve block. Coming on to the last topic of my talk, temporomandibular disorders. It encompasses a group of musculoskeletal and neuromuscular conditions like TM joint, masticatory muscles, and other associated tissues of the face. So it can be a masticatory muscle pain or TM joint pain because of osteoarthritis, synovitis, and capsulitis. And There is definitely diagnostic criteria. In 2013 it has been given in masticatory musculature pain, a complaint of muscle pain in the jaw, in the temple, in the ear, in the front of ear, that is affected by jaw movement, function or parafunction. And replication of this pain is by provoking these masticatory muscles. Just put a pressure on them, pain will be there. And for TM joint arthralgia, it is a joint pain affected by jaw movement, function and parafunction. And once you do press on this TM joint, pain will be there. So initial management is conservative with analgesics, NSAIDs, and occlusion appliances if teeth is there, and educate the patient. And in those who are not responding, you go for the TM joint injection. It is very simple procedure, outdoor procedure. You inject between mandibular condyle and glenoid fossa of the zygoma, around 1 to 2 ml solution of local anesthetic and steroid, 2 to 3 injections at the weekly intervals, and pain is almost gone. So to summarize, what we have learned in hemicranial neuralgia, trigeminal neuralgia, glossopharyngeal neuralgia, idiopathic facial pains, TM joint arthralgias, oricotemporal neuralgias, that following a pain continuum is an ideal approach. Always follow the patient, what he or she is saying. Multimodal therapy is the most effective treatment for these chronic pain syndromes. But at times, medications are not effective. If they are not effective, we should do interventions. And advanced interventions like RF or balloon decompressions, they are mandatory when all conventional modalities fail. And our aim is to improve the quality of life. Quality of life of the patient has to be improved. So always take a proper history, why patient is not having pain relief, do a proper examination, do relevant investigations, and if required, do interventions. So this is a picture of Ganesh Chaturthi, which is was very common in Maharashtra, but now done everywhere in Haryana. So I always say this is the matki of pain. So this matki of pain will be broken if you do a proper history, do a proper examination, do relevant investigations, and do interventions whenever necessary. Then only this matki of pain will be broken. So it all requires a multidisciplinary approach, and all the credits which I have shown here, this is not my alone work. It is a team which is working with me. These are all my students who have worked with me or are working with me. So it's a pain team which we all do, and both boys and girls are involved. And thank you to all my teachers, because of whom I am here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. You have covered neuralgia, pain, hemicranial pain in such a wonderful manner. So we'll just take 1 or 2 questions if there are any, so that we can move to the last talk. If 1 or 2 questions are there, anybody?
Sir, I want to ask you a question.
Hello. So I want to know, in the now law, what is your experience of the absolute alcohol?
Sir, a decade ago, absolute alcohol was the only drug which was used. And by absolute alcohol, we mean 100% alcohol, medical grade alcohol. But it is not 100% always, because it is a hygroscopic solution and it absorbs water and it becomes 95%, 90%. It is a very good neurolytic agent, and it is a very good antiseptic also, so chances of infections are very less. The only issue with this absolute alcohol, was development of anesthesia dolorosa. That means some partial nerve fibers were not completely destroyed, or if they were completely destroyed, when these nerves they regenerate, there occurs more neuropathic pain. Second, at the time of injection, patient have excruciating pain. So that patient don't have pain, in West they give sort of general anesthesia, use propofol, but that is not possible in India. So we used to give some local anesthetic before injecting alcohol. But once you have injected local anesthetic, you are already diluting 100% to 50%. So the beauty was good pain relief for maybe up to 1.5 years. Bad thing was transient neuropathies, immediate acute pain while injecting. Now we have switched to phenol, 6% phenol. Phenol is in powder form, and it requires boiling to convert it into liquid form. So we boil it down and boil the granules and convert it into local solution. 6 ml of phenol and 94 ml of saline. The advantage is that these transient neuropathies, they are very less with phenol.
So whatever my experience, I am using absolute alcohol with triamcinolone with 2% xylocaine. I mix the three components in a 1+1 ratio. And this is very good effect, and I am using last 10 years.
Agreed,
Most
sir.
of the facial pain, and the patient are mostly relieved by the pain by this combination.
Agreed, sir.
So I am not using till now this phenol, because I feel in phenol, some patient we are using in the medical college time, they have the more reaction, and sometimes the patient washing at the time of the injection. So at that time we have this absoluting, and we are using continue this combination, and I am satisfied with my result.
Agreed, sir. Last, what I was saying was, what you are saying is absolutely right, but I'll put my opinion. Before 10 years, we were using alcohol left and right, and still, if phenol is not available, we use alcohol. But as you yourself have said, that you are diluting 1-1-1, so you are not injecting 100% absolute alcohol, you are making it around 33 to 40%. Because
So I am using the solution of this chromic catgut, the thread which are packed in this chromic catgut, which has some solution. That is the 100%. I just aspirate from this thread pack, and mix with this tricot and this.
Don't do it, sir. Don't do this thing. Medical grade 500 ml bottle, absolute alcohol cost 580 rupees. Don't do this. Go to the scientific, order a scientific emporium, I want medical grade. There is industrial grade, there is medical grade. Just tell him I want medical grade absolute alcohol. It is available in less than 600 rupees. So availability is no issues. If he is not having ASR, he will buy it from Delhi. So availability of absolute alcohol, availability of phenol granules is not an issue. 1. 2. You are diluting 1 ml triamcinolone, 1 ml alcohol, 1 ml local anesthetic and 1 ml alcohol. So this is not absolute alcohol, sir. It is now 33 to 40% alcohol, because it has been diluted from 100% to 3 times. It will give good results. But if you use absolute alcohol, the duration of pain relief will be as high as 1.5 years. Once initial blocks, as you all know, once we give block, first block is of 1.5 years, then duration will be 1 year, then 6 months. As the frequency increases, the duration of nerve blocks decreases. You can use, we always say, choose the technique with which you are most comfortable with.
We are giving the weekly interval at least 3 or 4 injections.
Not required, sir.
And after 3-4 injections, the patient is absolutely free from pain.
Sir, you use, I will suggest, use 100% absolute alcohol or 6% phenol. You will not require at least before 3 months. Weekly intervals will not be required at all. Yes, as a diagnostic, if patient comes to you first time and you want to see that whether this nerve block will provide pain relief, then give a local anesthetic and triamcinolone or dipomedrol, whatever you want to give, and see if patient is a pain relief for even 3 hours to 3 days. That means this nerve block, if you block it permanently, do a chemical neurolysis, pain relief will be there. So if you do it with absolute alcohol or 6% glycerol, both are chemical neurolytic, both the drugs are not recommended in West. Chemical neurolysis is only done in the Asian countries. Chemical neurolysis is obsolete in the Western world. That is, I confess, right? But yes, our patients, we do it because it is very economical and they don't have to spend thousands and thousands of rupees for RF. RF procedure in Delhi costs 17,000 rupees. In my place, it costs nothing. That is a different thing. But you just don't worry about, if you are comfortable with alcohol, use 100% rather than 33%. 1, you will not be required to do it weekly. If you are very worried about glycerol, phenol 6%, take my word, nothing will happen. You will have better results with alcohol. But if still you want to continue with alcohol, you can. No issues with that. There was a question behind, please.
Sir, sometimes there is a patient for TMJ. He says, I don't have any pain, but I have sound, like crepitus sound when I am opening, closing. That is main problem is of sound.
Yes.
Sir, then what we can do, sir, in that case?
No need to give TM joint block, because there may be a simple mechanical dysfunction, or there may be a mild osteoarthritis. And if it is osteoarthritis, it will be associated with some amount of pain. But if it is only associated with some crackling sound, refer him to the dental surgeon. You are a dental surgeon?
Sir, I am a physiotherapist.
You are a physiotherapist. Refer him to dental surgeon. He will examine and give some occlusion devices. So there will be no need to inject, no need to manipulate, no need to do some hot fermentations, no need to put any gel. Only some occlusion devices which align the two bones. That is their job. It will be done.
Sometimes patients are using, like they are saying we are using splints for TMJ, but after using for 3-4 months they are not getting relief.
Agreed. At times they don't wear it whole night. At times they don't put it for the required number of hours. At times they are not of proper size also. So always keep a dental surgeon into the loop who will design them properly. Right? That is the most important thing. As far as your job is concerned or my job is concerned, our job comes when there is pain. Right? When pain is there, go for the conservative therapy, and then if conservative therapy fails, go for the simple block. Yes, you have to be very cautious that you do not inject into the brain, you do not inject into the facial artery which is lying very close. So those precautions have to be taken care. But yes, outdoor procedure, 2 to 3 blocks at a weekly interval, 2 to 3 ml of solution is usually very sufficient, and patients do really feel.
Thank you, sir.
Meditation.
Sir,
Sir,
one
please.
basic question.
Sir.
And this peripheral thermal, electrical or chemical pain is conducted through pain receptors via spinothalamic tract to the sensory cortex, and opioid receptors or opioid analgesics are quite effective. What is noxious stimulus in this neuralgia, and why these opioids are not effective? You have to go for nerve block.
Sir, first of all, I am not saying that. Two things you have to understand. Noxious stimuli is because of aberrant discharge. The ganglion, usually it is being compressed. There occurs focal demyelination. There occurs crosstalk between the fibers, pain fibers. They get impulses are coming. Impulses are used to travel like this. There is some crosstalk between two fibers, and nerves become hyperexcitable. And these nerves, once they become hyperexcitable, they start excessive discharging. Conduction is increased. So once this conduction is decreased, analgesic drugs have got zero role, because they will be just suppressing the receptors. But problem is not at the level of opioid receptors. Problem is at the level of the nerves which are hyperexcitable. So we need drugs which calm down the hyperexcitable drugs like pregabalin, gabapentin, carbamazepine, oscarbamazepine. So these drugs are beneficial rather than painkillers. In neuralgic pain, painkillers have got no role. I am saying in neuralgic pain like glossopharyngeal neuralgia, trigeminal neuralgia, prescribing diclofenac, tramadol, nimesulide, paracetamol, they have got no role. Only role is of the drugs which block the conduction of these nerve fibers which are hyperexcitable. In simple terms, which calm down the hyperexcitable nerves. So that is why opioid receptors, opioids, analgesics have got no role in neuralgias. First line of treatment is definitely drugs. I have shown you pictures of nerve blocks because I am an interventional pain specialist. But for the larger benefit of the house, if I see 200 patients of neuralgia, only 20 will require nerve blocks. 90% will be benefited by medical treatment. So putting needle everywhere is not an answer, but avoiding needle when indicated is also a problem. So 90% of the patients will do well definitely with the medical management. 10 to 15% will require nerve blocks.
Last
Sir.
One comment and last question.
Please, sir. Please, sir.
And, it's very excellent discussion, very much clarified. Narcotic analgesics, in fact, not of much help during this situation. You know, this is neuropathic pain.
Yes.
This is entirely different from that of somatic pain or nociceptive pain. So therefore, this neurotransmission, which is to be blocked, either in the form of nerve block or neurostabilization in the form of oxcarbamazepine or gabapentin and so on. So I'm having experience with couple of patients with pain which is confined to the nose. Even if you do this supraorbital nerve block, they don't get relief. I gave them this low dose of Botox on the nose because nose is very sensitive area. So, and after low dose Botox, they are doing excellent. So only few units, 5-6 units I gave them, and these small muscles, this here, and they are doing well. In supraorbital nerve block, they get relief of this pain, but not the pain over nose. So what is your?
Sir has raised very important points for the benefit of the students also. They are